You are listening to Inside IASB, a podcast series dedicated to informing and encouraging Illinois School Board members. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Isaac Warren. I'm the Director of Digital Communications at the Illinois Association of School Boards. And with me today, I have Justin Caldwell, who is a Director of Outreach and Training here at IASB. And today we're going to be talking about a new in-district workshop we're going to be offering called Fierce Conversations, and he is the point person for that. So, Justin, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Isaac, for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you a little bit about Fierce Conversations today.
For board members who maybe haven't heard that term before, what exactly is a fierce conversation, and why does it matter in the context of school board governance?
First, let me give credit to where credit is due. So Fierce Conversations is a book that was done by the author Susan Scott, and I've been around Fierce Conversations for about 15 years, and so it really is a great term and a great concept, as we'll dive into a little bit today. And so let me just start by taking away the context of the word fierce. You know, as we talk about leadership and governance, a fierce conversation really is one when participants come out from behind themselves into the conversation and make it real. The term does not imply anger or aggression. Instead, fierce represents that powerful, that robust, that unrestrained commitment to the truth.
Okay, so we're not talking about, full-throated screaming at each other. This is usually just conversations that need to happen that are maybe sometimes difficult. Is that a way to describe it?
It is. And the whole gist of the whole concept in the book is that our relationships, both professionally and personally, go bad gradually, then suddenly. And before that, we know it, we have no relationship because of the conversations that we're unwilling to have.
Yeah, cool. Okay, that sounds good. What are some of the common communication patterns or habits you see on boards that actually hold them back, maybe without them even realizing it?
You know, I've worked with a lot of boards, school boards, and then in previous arenas too, I've worked with a lot of not-for-profit boards and other board of directors. It's often fascinating. Boards are compromised. School boards and all other boards are compromised. Some of the most brilliant minds in the community and the industry, but so often they can fall into those, what I like to call those polite traps, that really inadvertently stifle good governance, because board dynamics rely heavily on decorum and hierarchy. And these habits often feel like best practices until you look at the outcomes. And so you really have to be aware. You really have to have that information avalanche. And so many boards really start to confuse transparency with volume. You know, you'll get a board or a district maybe that sends out a 300-page board report, and you feel obligated to read every word. And so again, you're focusing on the past, but are you really having those conversations and making those decisions to get you to the next level, or are you just being polite?
I think it's really interesting because it's almost like personal blind spots. I think it's easy to point out flaws in other people, but hard to find those flaws in yourself maybe, or maybe it's just a way of projecting your own flaws. I don't know. But I think that something like this is really good just for, I get some unbiased perspective of a board, maybe thinking we're doing things pretty good, but down below, it's just probably they're not having some critical conversations that need to be happening.
Absolutely. Yeah. So often, and unfortunately, Isaac, the most conversations we have every day are with ourselves. And so those conversations we're having with ourselves, like, should I say something? Should I not say something? How will they react if I say this? Will the relationship be damaged? And so all these things are going through our mind, but we're not having the conversation. And so unfortunately, things aren't moving forward.
Sure. Yeah. I couldn't agree more there. And it kind of leads us to our next question here, that board members often worry that being too direct could create conflict. So how does this workshop help them navigate honesty without damaging relationships?
Very, very common and valid concern. In a boardroom setting, the stakes are high, the personalities are often strong, and it makes radical honesty feel like a professional risk, right? This workshop is really designed specifically to shift that perspective from confrontation to kind of the me versus you to collaboration, us versus the problem. This is how we help board members navigate that tension. We start to move from the truth telling to the truth seeking. So the old way is the strategy is never going to work, right? Someone presents something, oh, that's never going to work. But now in this workshop, you have a concern about the scalability of the strategy. So you ask the question, help me understand how we handle this. And so it creates the dialogue. Instead of just shutting everything down and saying, this strategy is never going to work, when someone steps up and says, I have a concern about the strategy, the scalability of it, help me understand, that starts a dialogue. So you begin to say, okay, let's discuss it. Let's talk about it instead of just completely shutting it down. And so that's one of the elements that comes out of this workshop.
Sure. And I think it's a really good way of kind of separating a person's personal individual worries and making it part of the groups, because again, as a school board, you have to operate as a singular entity, a singular group, each with their own agendas and their own motives, kind of crossing their arms like, well, I have a problem with this and this isn't going to work. That just doesn't get much done. But having it so that even the way you just in your example of how you reframed, you're going to get the same, you're going to get the answers you need, but you're framing it in a way that's much less hostile and much more open. And even just, I think it just disarms people when they hear, like, I'm just curious. It's more of a curiosity thing almost.
Yeah, and there's really, without giving too much of the workshop away, there's really three things that you really just kind of focus on, and the gist of the foundational workshop for Fierce Conversation is how it works is you use I statements. You focus on personal observation rather than objective blame because it reduces that feeling of being accused when you use the I statements. And then you focus on that curiosity gap. Ask a question before making a statement, because that, again, then creates that space for other people to explain their logic and their thinking. And then finally, you really have that intent kind of versus that impact. So you acknowledge the good intent behind a peer's idea before addressing the negative impact. And that helps reduce conflict because it maintains the relationship while critiquing the idea. Because at the end of the day, it's about the relationship. We can disagree on things, but we have to have that relationship in order to move forward.
Sure. Yeah, disagreement is not a failure of conversation. It's just sometimes it happens, but knowing how to navigate those disagreements is very critical. So maybe for a board that feels like maybe everything is just fine, how can they tell if they're actually avoiding the kinds of conversations that lead to stronger governance and better outcomes?
Yeah, there's several things you can look at. In the previous, I talked a little bit about, being that polite board, but that's, when a board feels like everything is fine, it's often in that state of polite stagnation. Everything feels comfortable. There's frequently a symptom of artificial harmony, a culture where the social cohesion is prioritized over the intellectual friction. And again, how do you tell if your board is fine or if it's actually avoiding the work that matters? One of the greatest things, we like those red, green, yellow reports, right? And so often, if you get a green report that's green all the time and there's no red or yellow, you have to ask yourself the question. If you aren't seeing the problems, are you looking at the right data? Or if the superintendent doesn't feel safe sharing the messy truth? Because at the end of the day, no organization, no school board, no school district is perfect, right? So we really have to focus on that and say, hey, let's have that healthy friction. Let's really ask, are we looking at the right things? Because there should be some of that, what I'll call that red and yellow.
Yeah, like we said, no district's going to be perfect. And if a district telling themselves, well, I think everything's fine because like we said, we get all greens, we're passing everything. I think a workshop like this kind of has to attack that hubris a little bit and humble the board to be, well, let's look at the data and see if there's maybe something we know we're actively avoiding, because we know if we pull this thread, it will unleash Pandora's box or something.
Yeah, and maybe, I guess I explain a little bit more when I said, that culture where social cohesion is prioritized over the intellectual friction. So if you look at that social cohesion, you look at that kind of, yes, everything is great, we don't want to disrupt everything. But then intellectual friction, that's what you really need to have. Because again, if you remember, I said boards are comprised of very, very intelligent individuals. And so we all come from different avenues in life. And so what we can bring to the table and have those conversations are just going to create better things for our children and for our school districts. And so that's why we really have to have those fierce conversations.
Let's say we have a listener, someone listening, like a board member listening, and they say, well, this sounds helpful, but we don't have any like big issues. Like, yeah, we have issues. We don't have big issues. What would you say to them then?
I would say that's the best time to bring in a Fierce Conversations foundational workshop, because you may not have any big issues, nothing going on, but you really need to emphasize that proactive governance because it's a springboard for long-term success. We've heard that statement, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So let's use this moment as a district of stability to build organizational muscle. It's much harder to implement new structures or risk frameworks in the middle of a crisis, right? That's the last thing you really want to do is come in during crisis mode and say, all right, let's figure out fierce conversations. But if you as a board and a district can build this ahead of time, you're preparing yourself for the future. It's really a strategy and it's a really proactive good governance.
Yeah, it's an investment, really. And if a board legitimately doesn't have those big issues, that's fantastic. And yeah, this is an excellent opportunity to say, like, if you don't have any big issues, this is like perfect time to start paving that foundation for if and when that time comes. Is I feel like with board work, it's not really a matter of if, it's more of a when, because things just happen sometimes that are unpredictable and can really throw anyone for a loop. And having a way of knowing like, well, this is going to be difficult, but we can get through it because we know as a board, we know how to have these fierce conversations instead of it devolving into screaming and yelling and then having to figure out how to do this anyway in the midst of all this. I mean, that just sounds like horrible.
Yeah, and one of the things too, especially for a board who says that they're in a great place, everything is fine, I don't need this. I've done this for a number of years, and I'm a certified facilitator for fierce conversations. One of the things that always comes up are those blind spots. A board will come up and say, oh, I didn't realize that. Or someone will say something, bring something to the conversation because they didn't want to say it before. But now we've created that environment and that transparency to say, okay, let's bring it up and have this conversation. I've seen it happen time and time again. So it's great to really to move forward and be proactive and create the stability for the future.
And I think the goal too would be for veteran board members to be able to bring, when we have new board members being elected to the board, they can carry on that vision and that foundation and really emphasize like, here's how I as a veteran, how we operate as a board, so that they can inform the new members ahead of time. Like, here's what you can expect from us in terms of having conversations like this. And it's not that, we learn these things through trial and error, or we just know that it's just something preventative that we need to do to make sure our board's functioning correctly. And that alone, if you're bringing in new board members with that type of thinking, that's going to help your board really navigate these and help a lot in the future.
Yeah, it really is. And I would do a lot of work with the boards, and we do a lot of work around board protocols. And so I tell boards, I say, you want to develop your board protocols and you want to make sure everything is spelled out as much as possible, because not only for now as you're operating as a board, but let's say that a board member or two board members, maybe life change happens, maybe a job across the United States, or maybe a family member moves and they have to move. If you don't have anything in place for these new board members that either get elected or appointed, then you risk maybe some chaos and maybe some uncertainty. But if you have things in place, it makes things go better. And so I think by preparing and having workshops and continuing to do that training, it sets your board up for success.
So let's say we've got a board member listening to this podcast and they want to give this workshop a shot and they want to have it done in their district. How can they get that conversation started as a board and with IASB?
Absolutely. I think the first thing they need to do is start that conversation internally. So before reaching out to the IASB, they should really gauge the interest and build consensus with their own team of 8, the 7 board members and the superintendent. And then I think they just really need to have those casual one-on-one conversations with the board president and superintendent and get their buy-in, get it on the agenda, have a discussion about it, and be prepared to explain the why you think you need it. And that's where I can come into play. I can help answer those questions at board meeting. If board members have questions regarding that, I can help answer those questions and then really have that discussion. And then we can reach out, we can discuss it. I can talk to the board member, the superintendent, the board president, and they can actually reach out to any of their IASB director of outreach and training. We can get in touch and we can schedule some joint calls and really go forward with it.
Perfect. Well, Justin, thank you so much for coming on the podcast to introduce this new in-district workshop to our listeners and members. I think that this is going to be something that's just a lot of boards should be taking advantage of. And like you said, this is just another way that we're providing some resources to make sure boards are set up for success in the future should the time come for some fierce conversations.
Well, thanks for having me, Isaac. And if you couldn't tell, I'm very passionate about fierce conversations. I think it's needed by everyone, and just something we just continue to build on it each and every day.
Thank you for listening to the podcast, and thank you for your dedicated volunteer service to public education. If you would like to stay up to date with future episodes, please consider following us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, or your platform of choice. Have a comment or question? We welcome listener feedback and invite you to send us an email at communications@iasb.com. Thank you.